Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to today's webinar, Path to Purchase, Moving from Awareness to Conversion. I'm Paul Verna, Vice President of Content at eMarketer, coming to you from our studio in New York. I'm joined by an exciting panel of experts and colleagues, starting to my left with Suzy Davidkhanian, Vice President of Content. Hey, Suzy.
Hey, Paul.
And Blake Droesch, Senior Analyst. Blake.
Paul, great to be here.
And last but not least, Sarah Marzano, Principal Analyst. Hey, Sarah.
Hi, Paul. Thanks for having me.
Great for all of you to be here. Now, for those of you who are new to eMarketer, we are the leading research, data, and insights provider that helps companies maximize their revenues, optimize spend, and anticipate digital disruption. We empower companies to make informed decisions by providing forecasts, data, and insights through our carefully vetted data sources and our proprietary research methodology. Blake is going to kick off the session with a short slide deck, and then we'll move on to a group discussion, followed by audience Q&A. All right, Blake, over to you.
Thanks, Paul. So before we begin, I want to take a moment to provide some context on the evolution of the path to purchase. So we'll simplify it a bit by breaking it down into three distinct eras: the past, the present, and the future. So in the pre-digital era, there were far fewer channels for consumers to discover, research, and purchase new products. Traditional media advertising was limited to TV, radio, and print, and consumers had even fewer options for evaluating new products. There were publications like Consumer Reports and specialty trade magazines, but most likely you were getting recommendations from friends and family or going to stores and speaking with sales associates. And of course, when it came down to purchasing the product, nearly all conversion took place inside of a physical store. Now we shift to present day. In the digital era, each step along the path to purchase has become significantly more complex. The store remains a vital centerpiece, and we'll explore that further in a moment, but the number of digital channels that consumers are using to discover and evaluate brands continues to grow at a rapid pace. To make things even more complex, the path to purchase is different for each product category, and different demographics prefer to use different channels at each stage of the shopping journey. This means that brands can't solely focus on high traffic platforms like Meta, Google, and Amazon. They also need to incorporate the long tail of connected TV and podcast advertising, emerging online marketplaces, and niche social networks. And if that wasn't enough to keep marketers busy for the next decade, we're getting a glimpse of what the future might hold. Of course, I'm referring to trends like social commerce, shoppable media, and retail media that have the power to collapse the funnel and create an experience where a consumer discovers, evaluates, and purchases a product all within the same platform. And it's not just social commerce. Amazon is using its powerful consumer data to target Prime Video users with shoppable ads, and Walmart and NBC have developed an AI tool that scans original programming for products, which are then served as shoppable ads during commercial breaks. It's still far too early to know if and to what degree consumers will engage with these types of experiences, but it's certainly something that brands need to begin experimenting with, particularly in areas that are gaining traction, like TikTok Shop. We'll talk a little bit more about the future in our panel discussion, but now I want to bring it back to today, or at least to November 2023, when we published our first eMarketer Path to Purchase consumer survey. The results were fascinating, and they help contextualize the growing influence of digital alongside tried and true shopping channels. Digital, of course, has a massive influence, and what you don't see on this chart were the strong percentages of consumers who also discovered new brands and products on social media, connected TV, and search engines. But it was also fairly clear that no single digital channel has replaced the influence of the store when it comes to driving product and brand awareness. When we asked consumers where they discovered new brands and products, in-store was the top answer for every product category except for electronics, where consumers slightly preferred retail websites. We also found that the physical store still leads in purchase intent. When consumers discovered a brand or product when shopping in a store, 31% purchased that item right away. This was significantly higher than shoppers who discovered items on retail websites. By comparison, just 19% of those shoppers made an immediate purchase. But respecting the power of the store doesn't mean you can avoid digital, even in product categories where the majority of sales occur in stores. As I mentioned, electronics is the only category where consumers were more likely to discover a new brand or product on a retail website. And this makes sense because electronics is one of the most digitally mature categories, with more than half of sales coming from e-commerce in the US. But look at a category like food and beverage. Here, more than 90% of sales still occur in the store. So discovery is way more likely to occur inside of a physical store. But consumers are still learning about new food and beverage items online, particularly as they shop on retail sites and browse social media. Speaking of social media, it's massively influential in the beauty category, with nearly 30% of shoppers discovering a new brand or product via a social network, and that's second only to the store in this category. And then when we look specifically at Gen Z, the role of digital, of course, becomes even more prominent. Social media is tied with in-store as the top awareness channel in the beauty category. And brand sites are level with the influence of the store in the footwear category and in furniture and home goods. Gen Z's shopping behavior will of course change over time, but it's safe to assume that digital channels will play an elevated role at each stage in the path to purchase as the generation ages and its purchasing power increases. With that, I'll kick it back to Paul, who is going to lead our panel discussion.
Well, that was great, Blake. Now, since you just talked about this, I'd also like to hear from Sarah and Suzy on the collapsed funnel versus a nonlinear path to purchase. So how did this evolve and what does it mean? We'll start with you, Sarah.
Yeah, no, I can take this. I think for me, what comes to mind is really the proliferation of digital touch points that are part of consumers' everyday lives. So beyond the ways we shop or intentionally consume content, I think about the way I paid for my coffee this morning, the way I got onto the subway, the way I keep up with my family and friends and pay my credit card bill. This digital connectivity is really infused into our day-to-day existence. And I think with that, there's an opportunity for content consumption, and there's an opportunity for retailers and brands to facilitate product discovery wherever a consumer is throughout their day. You can also facilitate both formal and informal product research, and then increasingly we're seeing the mechanisms that enable conversion become more sophisticated, right? So that arenas that you didn't normally think as of a place where someone would make a purchase are now making that possible today. So I think on one hand, you have a case where the purchase funnel can really contract, right? If you find someone at the right time, at the right place, you can walk them through discovery and consideration and purchase all in one sitting. And I think anyone who's bought something after discovering it on a social media ad can relate to that. But on the other hand, consumers are sort of spoiled. We know how many choices that we have. We know all the options that we have for purchasing a product, fulfilling a product. And I think that's removed some of the urgency and created what can be a really fragmented path to purchase. And I think for brands and retailers, that's both a threat as well as an opportunity, which we'll get more into.
What's your take on it, Suzy?
So, I mean, I agree 100%. The only thing I would add is in this immersive experience, it's where we find that there is that distinction between, which Sarah already spoke about and Blake talked through, around like the linear path, which was really like each step of the path to purchase, awareness that you need something, doing research, buying it. I mean, this is what we study, but there's also like after purchase care. So that was very well identified and easy to follow. And now that everything is shoppable and everything is an ad, it's become very different to understand, like when you hear about something, are you right away going to purchase it or not? How do you think about doing research? And Blake showed us, in some categories, people are more important. I mean, we know influencers help with conversion. So there's lots of different ways of getting research and information to make that final decision, which is different. So that's like the path not being linear anymore, which is the different part of the collapsed funnel, which is like shopping on TV, like, all the things we used to think about are all now in one shot. So in the same platform, you're discovering, you're hearing about it, people are talking to you about it, you're asking whatever questions you have, and then you're making the purchase. It's hard. It's hard for brands. And so hopefully we'll be able to help a little bit with that.
So Blake and Sarah, the importance of the store, the physical store, is very well established. I mean, 83% of retail transactions in the US still happen in a store. So with all of that discovery and all of those transactions happening in a store, what role do digital channels play in influencing that path to purchase? And let's start with you, Blake.
Yeah, absolutely. And one of the questions that we asked is we trace it after discovering a product in store. What actions do you take after that? The number one answer was consumers will look up a product on a search engine. And that was it's a very popular consideration tool, regardless of where the consumer first comes across the new brand or product. But interesting enough, it was way more common for consumers to look up these brands and products on their phones, through a search engine, than it was for them to speak with an in-store associate. Yeah. So it's almost a guarantee at this point that a consumer who is engaging with a brand or product for the first time in store is going to have some sort of digital interaction before making the purchase. Even if that purchase ends up happening that day on that shopping trip, the influence of digital both in the store and in that short process is very relevant. Yeah.
Yeah, I think for me, the results of our survey really showing the importance of those digital channels for conducting further research, even if you discover a product in store, shows me how customers have grown accustomed to the expanded information and content that's enabled by a digital ecosystem. So consumers know that's where to turn for things like more merchandising imagery or user-generated content that builds that social proof to make a purchase. They know that online is a great place to do product comparisons or look for the best price. So I think where that leaves brands or retailers who have physical spaces is thinking through, if you know your customer is going to be doing this, how do you enable it and how do you facilitate it in a really clean way, right? And I think the sort of 1.0 version of that is just like, how's your Wi-Fi in store, right? Are you making this something that they can do in store? And it's also thinking through how your brand shows up across the channels that we know customers turn to, right? So if we know they're turning to traditional search, what does that look like? Your brand website, your retailer website presence. Younger consumers rely on social media. And then I think the 2.0 version of that is when we think through how stores are increasingly becoming digital. So how do we take physical spaces and bring some of that information we know customers are going to be looking for and embed it right there in the path to purchase? So thinking through things like QR codes or mobile apps that keep customers within your ecosystem can be a great way to do that. And I also love thinking about sort of unique partnerships. Like I love what Best Buy did with CNET, where they're taking those expert reviews that Best Buy knows are really important to their customers who are purchasing maybe higher consideration products and bringing those expert reviews right into the path to purchase, right? Whether that's on their website or in their physical stores. And I'm excited to see more interesting activations and partnerships like that.
So let's shift to talking about conversion. And Suzy and Blake, when you think about things like apps and loyalty programs and pricing, what helps remove friction and get that customer to pull the trigger?
So I think it's super important to think about it both from a store perspective. Conversion is important, and ensuring that there's an ease at payment in a store is equally important. Obviously, it's 80% of sales than online. And there's two separate things that help enable conversion to happen more smoothly. At the end of the day, you need to remove friction points, right? So if online, for example, the person forgot their ID and they need to log in and you make it really hard to get back to their password, that's a problem, right? You're going to start losing people. If we don't have the easy button, which Amazon made very, very easy for everybody else to sort of copy in some way. And even that was so easy that now they have like fraud sort of protection mechanism. Are you sure you want to buy this? Because it was so easy, right? So thinking about removing blockers, auto fill your credit card, ensure you have the right payment method. we were talking about this a lot during buy now, pay later craze around you need to have all of the payment methods up front, because if I value a certain kind of payment method and I'm already at the cart, it's kind of too late.
Yeah.
So there's a lot of these little things. One of the things I think we don't talk a lot about is having additional features like a wish list, for example, because a lot of people put things in their cart without the intention of actually purchasing, right? So that's like a weird data point for a retailer who all of a sudden there's like 10 things in your basket and they think you didn't convert on all 10, you only bought 2, but it's because you were just holding on to it. So putting in wish lists and other sort of features, inventory counts and other things to help make the whole process easier will enable easier conversion.
Yeah, I'll approach that from a slightly different angle, and just talking about really the decisions that a consumer makes before they actively go and purchase a product. And it's really it's really what you would expect. The results from the survey, it showed better quality, better price. But when it comes to the influence of digital, it was ratings and reviews overwhelmingly. And there's all this talk about, the influence of online publications, bloggers, and content creators, celebrity endorsements. The ratings and reviews across the different categories were more important to consumers when it came to actually purchasing a product. And that really, it sounds simple, but it can be a very messy process, ensuring that your ratings and reviews on your website are trustworthy. And it really comes down to content moderation for a retailer. And we've seen different ways of approaching, whether it's adding unique tools onto the interface where you can search, there's AI summarizing the reviews, there are labels that can say, okay, this is a highly returned product. But having that resource available is really important. And I think it gets talked about a lot, but it is worth mentioning because of the fact that it really does, when the consumer gets down to those really low stages in the funnel, it becomes very important.
Well, and I would add to that, it's such a good point, and throw in the influencer for user-generated content. I was at a conference a few weeks back, and one of the vendors was saying through user-generated content, they see 145% increase in conversion, because typically a brand will pick influencers that are, relatively well-known in that space, that elicit trust. And at that last minute, so there's no buyer's remorse, you need something to help you sort of move along and be like, yep, this is what I want. So said it, whether it's your friend or the influencer or it's the right price. At the end, though, it's the product is king. So if you don't have the right product, you're not going to be able to move them to conversion.
I always buy when I'm under the influence, by the way.
You might not be alone. That might be enough. We can't talk
That's
about it here.
another webinar.
Yeah.
All right, so I'd like to hear from each of you on this. With all this evolution impacting the shopper path to purchase, how should brands and retailers prioritize their different capabilities? And is that approach different for brands versus retailers? And Sarah, if we can start with you.
Yeah, so I think first I just want to acknowledge that there's a lot of complexity here, right? And if you're a brand or retailer feeling overwhelmed, I think that makes a lot of sense, right? My background is in retail, and I can attest to the fact that having more information and more data does not always lead to clearer decision making. But Suzy, I think you teed it up perfectly. One of the things I was going to say is that for anyone feeling overwhelmed, thinking through how to avoid chasing after shiny objects and making sure that you have a really clear framework to hold yourself accountable for evaluating the fundamentals of your business, right? You can have the best social commerce strategy under the sun, but if you don't have the right product assortment, if your pricing strategy isn't matching your customers' needs, right, it's not going to get you anywhere. And then the next thing I'll say is that I feel like we're all pretty comfortable acknowledging that the path to purchase has changed. It's really blurry. It's not linear. Consumers aren't shopping and experiencing brands or retailers in silos. But what hasn't necessarily caught up here is the organizational structure at the brands or marketers themselves, right? And so thinking through how you organize your teams, how you structure your budgets to make sure that they're not reflecting the capabilities of those channels from yesterday, because all of that is changing really quickly. So it's both about empowering the experts in your organization, but also making sure that those folks are empowered and connected to the other parts of your organization in order to make sure that you're putting forth a cohesive strategy.
Well, it's like, again, if you don't have a good filtering system, if you don't have a good search function on your
Yeah.
website, like there are all these things that you need to get done well, well, so that people can find what they're looking for when they're coming to you to search. The awareness, and it's also a tricky question because it depends on what stage of the funnel, let's call it, that we're thinking about, right? Because awareness, you do need to lean in on things like TV shows and maybe, other entertainment. But then if you're thinking about the search part, if your website is not easy to use or you can't find what you're looking for, then that's a problem. And so then I think, although I know we didn't want to maybe always talk about Gen AI, but there are lots of tools that enable, and Blake talked about it a little bit, the Gen AI that can come in and help you better understand descriptions or help you better understand how to plan parties or help you just do something a little bit quicker. And so as brands and retailers think through this, really consider what is it that is causing a lot of friction in the journey for the person to know that they need something and then to come to you and purchase it, and try and solve for those in sometimes very simple ways. It doesn't always have to be tech enabled.
I would just add is, it sounds like, because the path to purchase has become so technical, that brands should really be leaning into performance. But I think that it's important to remind everyone that having a strong brand in this environment that is so noisy and the consumer is engaging with several different touch points, having a brand that stands out, where there's reputation for quality, is so much more important to be able to cut through the noise today. So it's really not just about, when you say you need to, a brand really needs to be everywhere and there needs to be all these different strategies. It is very technical. There is a lot of elements in which performance advertising can help you move that customer down the funnel. But at the top, brand is more important than ever now, arguably.
Yeah, I think you're absolutely right, and I think it's important to caution away from an over reliance on performance marketing metrics, even though they're really exciting to be able to report on the efficacy of your investment. But if you focus only on where your customer is converting, I think this research just proves how much you're going to miss from reaching them at earlier stages in their journey.
And I think we didn't talk enough about the app. Like, I think most retailers need to remember that everybody carries a phone with them. And so making sure that you have a strong app that's sticky, that has features that are important, both shopping on the bus, in the subway, if there's Wi-Fi, in the store itself, things like price checking, inventory checking. Like, there's a lot of things you can do that are very simplistic in some ways, right? But that are important to the path to purchase.
So let's talk about upcoming channels and tactics. So I'm thinking things like shoppable media, social commerce, live streaming. And I'd like to hear from all of you because you all have such great insights that I just can't resist. So let's start with you, Suzy. What do you think will catch on?
So I feel like we work together so often. I'm going to talk about live streaming because it's one of my favorite things, and I'm only going to talk about live streaming. I am very excited about this. I've been very excited about it from the beginning. I realize that it is so small in the US, and I'm not sure that it'll ever be a very high dollar value. But I think, to what Blake was saying before, it's not just, if you understand your KPIs and you understand why you're doing things, some of it might just be for awareness and some of it might be just to get trust. And so that's really like the funnel has collapsed when you're live streaming. Will we ever get to the place where China is? Probably not, because we don't have a lot of the infrastructure to support quick commerce. A lot of the live streaming categories are the ones that you need to have immediately. A lot of the US retail folks are outside of grocery. It's not an immediate need. Will it take off in quick service? Maybe a little bit more in the restaurant world. But I do think that there's a lot of fun images and a lot of halo effect and authenticity that comes from live streaming, which is part of the reason why there are all these blurred lines.
Anybody want to take shoppable media, social commerce, both?
I'll say quickly that, I think that, as I mentioned, there's still a lot of question marks around how are consumers going to engage with these different shoppable media experiences that are being created, not just on social platforms, but elsewhere as well. It really comes down to which experiences are going to be able to leverage consumer data to properly target the audience and then remove as much friction as possible to the point where you are truly collapsing the funnel. And I think that that's a pretty big ask on the behalf of the consumer, right? However, when you do particularly look at what Amazon is doing, where you could be watching a television show on a streaming service that they are operating, and then with one click of one click of your button, have the product from the TV commercial that you're seeing being added to your cart. That's a pretty seamless experience for the 70% of the US population that has access to an Amazon Prime account. So I think that there is a lot of interest because there's a lot of sophistication. But I do think that, as retailers, as marketers, you always have to remember that the only thing you should be really chasing is the interest of the consumer. And if the consumer isn't interested yet, then you need to be also finding them elsewhere.
This is the part about being authentic, right? And like not spamming everybody with everything. And I think it's like so I love live stream shopping. I know not everybody believes in it quite as much as I do, which is why I took it. But I do think that there is this idea around authentic, making sure people know who you are, cutting through the noise as best you can. That's part of the like non-linear path versus the collapsed, like everything happening in one shot, like the Amazon example, or even like you were telling us about was it New York Times, like the recipes, which is not new. Walmart was doing it with a different magazine where like you can see a recipe that you like, and in one click, all of a sudden you have all the groceries coming your way. The next generation of that will be like, oh, we know you bought mustard 3 months ago and you probably don't need it now. So it'll take out the thing. So I think if you are doing it in an authentic way and using data, then of course people are going to come to you, right? They're going to feel heard and it's going to feel like a personalized activity.
I think the only thing I'd have to add is I think if we take the shoppable video example, I think that's exactly it. It's thinking through, like, are you trying to incentivize the customers to do something brand new that they never would have done otherwise? Or are you thinking through, like, how might someone already be shopping while they're watching a video or watching an event on television, right? We all know that when we're relaxing with the big screen, we still have our little screen, right? So how are you removing some steps? And it's probably not going to be making someone whip out their camera to capture a QR code, right? But it's about saying, here are the product categories we know you might already be browsing, or we know you might be interested in ordering food while you watch this event, and we're going to make it really easy for you to do that. We're going to remove some steps that we know that you're already engaging in.
Well, we can't possibly have a discussion among retail experts without talking about retail media. So I'd like to hear from you, Sarah, as our lead voice on retail media. What do you see in this space? Blake, I'd like you to weigh in as well. So what are your thoughts?
Yeah, I think it's very interesting to think about retail media through the lens of supporting the entire path to purchase, because there's a lot of evolution happening in this space. We still see the majority of retail media ad spend happening relatively low on the funnel and happening in an on-site environment. But that's really changing, right? In our forecast, when we look at off-site ad spend, it's still a smaller piece of the pie, but it's ticking north, right? So I think by next year, we're going to see off-site retail media ad spend exceed 20%. And then that trend comes more into focus if you isolate display advertising. So our colleague Max Willens just published some research on this, looking at the share of off-site display exceeding the share of on-site display. So what I think that means is that we're going to end up in a world where retail media is positioned to be part of the entire path to purchase. And there's a lot of complexity to unpack here, especially when you get into things like budget and, again, organizational structures. But just to keep us close to the topic at hand, I think what's really exciting is the possibility that is being unlocked around being able to target audiences in upper funnel spaces based on their actual purchase and transaction history. So things that they actually have bought and done versus things that they maybe say they've done or are just interested in. There's a huge power that's going to unlock for advertisers, and it's cool to see retailers really writing the playbook here in real time.
Yeah, I think, Blake, the Amazon example you pointed out really is a form of retail media if you're looking at like CTV advertising on Amazon. So is that something like, where do we see CTV fitting into this environment?
I think obviously it's difficult not to just pull up Amazon with every example, right?
Right.
Because they are in the rare, the unique situation where they have a flywheel where they are in ownership of a media
Right.
property as well as a retail site, as well as a very robust membership program that really powers all of the data. But what we're seeing now, of course, are these partnerships that are being formed, particularly, as I mentioned before, Walmart and NBC. There are different media partnerships with other brands, other retailers, Target, Instacart. And really it's about figuring out how to leverage all of this unique data that retailers have at different areas of the funnel. And as we all know, if you're looking for that upper funnel, that brand awareness, the connected TV environment is, relatively conducive to what we had with regular television. Obviously, it's more fragmented from an audience-wise, but it's also more targetable. And one of the interesting findings from the data from the Path to Purchase survey was that in areas like food and beverage, where there is was historically a lot of brand awareness happening on television, connected TV actually got a little bit of a bump compared to other categories. So I think that already is starting to happen. And I think the way that retailers are really getting in on it is by leveraging this data and making it more powerful than a platform that is hosting connected TV would be able to do without them.
Right. Well, this was a great conversation. I wish we could continue because there's so many fascinating topics to explore, but we do have to move on into the Q&A. We received quite a few good questions in advance. The first one is for you, Suzy. What are the driving factors to getting foot traffic in locations?
I love this question. I'm going to interpret it as like there's different types of locations, right? Like there's malls, there are strip malls, there's, open air malls. It's like, so I think it depends on how you think about location. So if I think about a traditional mall, the issue here in terms of foot traffic, I mean, I'm taking online off of it, right? Because we already know stores are 85% of sales. So when I think about a mall, a lot of the anchor stores that I grew up with at least are no longer here. And so it's like, how do malls partner with the retailers to find better anchors? I grew up in Canada. In Canada, there are grocery stores and malls. There are obviously movie theaters like there are here. The local mall by my parents' house has a library. There's a DMV. It's like, how do you think about the composition of the mall to make sure that you have the right ancillary servicey kind of things so that you also then place the right retail brands so that then you have good foot traffic. So there's that part, which is has to do with the mall, but then you also have to make sure that your store is nice, right? That you have Wi-Fi, that it's clean, that it's not cluttered, that you are inviting, that you have services, that you maybe do events, that you sort of try and create a community that is authentic to your brand. So obviously you can't do something like a nightclub if you are, a slightly older brand, with an older customer. But if you just think about how do you lay it out in a way that is inviting, then I think it's like this two-prong approach, doing well as the retailer itself in terms of offering the right space, but then also as a mall, how do you bring in more people?
And in Canada, everyone is friendlier, so you just get more people naturally, right?
That's right, especially when there's a grocery store. I mean,
The DMV, it's just
like,
so
yeah.
Yeah,
convenient.
the DMV. Imagine a friendly DMV.
Yeah.
I can't.
a
but
drugstore. I mean, like there's really everything in the mall. Like there's one of everything.
Makes so much sense.
So the next question is about retail media. So Sarah, we're going to go to you. And specifically the question is, where are we in the sales cycle in terms of retail media in physical stores?
Yeah, this is one of my favorite topics, but I think it's important to cut through the noise a little bit. It's exciting to talk about. There's a lot of cool innovation happening in the space, but we're still in very early innings when it comes to in-store retail media. So within our forecast, I think we have in-store retail media topping 1 billion by 2028. But to put that into context, that comes into less than 1% of total digital ad spend. A lot of retailers are in sort of a wait and see phase. Some are taking a test and learn approach. And I think it'll be really interesting to see how this unfolds, because on one hand, you have sort of the low-hanging fruit activation of things like leveraging in-store radio to bring audio advertising advertising in. You have some folks doing cool things with sample and demo stations and infusing some retail media capabilities into that. And on the other end of the spectrum, you have your Instacarts and your Amazon developing their proprietary smart carts, which are quite expensive. And it will be interesting to see whether their push to get third-party retailers leveraging that technology takes off, because I think that's really the gold standard for being able to bring retail media into stores in a way that feels really contextual. But certainly very, very early innings here. It'll be an exciting space to watch, but it's going to take a while. Also, because you can test something and figure out that it works, but then deploying it across a fleet of brick and mortar stores looks really different than it does for deploying it in an online ecosystem. And I think then we get into some of the foundational elements of running a brick and mortar store that, Suzy, you just touched on around, like, how does your store look and feel to shop in, right? Do you want smart carts rolling through maybe a store that has seen better days? So a lot for retailers to unpack there.
All right, so here's a good one for you, Blake. What surprises you about the path to purchase for CPG shoppers?
Yeah, so I think, CPG is it's one of these very difficult areas when we think about the path to purchase and gauging the digital influence. So in comparison to the other categories, food and beverage, as well as household essentials, health and personal care among them, the influence of the store is just much more significant, and that's natural. A lot of people going into the stores, into stores to purchase their household essentials. But on the other side, it's also, these are some of the fastest growing categories in e-commerce. So how are retailers and CPG brands really justifying their investments in digital and tracing it to the physical purchase? Because we know that there's a lot of instances in which consumers, particularly younger consumers, are discovering these new CPG products. Many of them have gotten very popular on social media, different types of limited edition flavors of Oreos and Coca-Cola products, but it might not necessarily be moving the needle for digital sales. And that really takes me back to just, I'll reiterate, just the importance of brand when it comes to investing in digital. And you would be remiss as a CPG brand to be focusing on performance and driving digital sales and attributing your success with your digital investments strictly to what you can squeeze out of a digital conversion channel. If you're not also looking at it holistically, how is social driving, like for example, how is my activity on social driving in-store foot traffic to go purchase these products? If you're not looking at it by generation, by this long tail of podcast advertising and connected TV, how is that overall influencing the activity of the shopper in store? I think this is the main insight, which is, it's definitely one of the bigger black boxes in the path to purchase, but it's definitely something that a lot of retailers too need to grapple with in terms of how they are communicating the value of their relationships with the brands.
How does mobile play a role in the purchase journey?
Yeah, I think this echoes a lot of the things that we've been talking about around the importance of digital channels. And Suzy, you and I were just talking about a stat around, I think it's over 3/4 of shoppers in stores have their mobile devices with them and are using them. So of course, mobile is how customers often are turning to traditional search channels or checking out a brand website or maybe browsing on social even while they're in store. We see mobile as a very important tool when it comes to in-store retail media, right? I didn't get to mention that earlier, but thinking through leveraging the technology that your consumer is already comfortable using and already has with them. So maybe that's a geo-targeted promotional push for someone who's coming into your store. Maybe it's enabling scan as you shop. And then obviously mobile is really important for online shopping as well. I think we saw mobile drive over 50% of online sales for the first time this past holiday season. So it's cool to see how mobile is impacting both traditional channels as well as digital.
And Blake, since the audience specifically asked for you, you got to give us an answer as well here.
Well, I'll take it strictly from the e-commerce. Sarah gave a really good summary of basically what's happening in store. And I would almost argue that the mobile experience and optimization for in-store is more important than e-commerce at this point. But we are seeing that over the next couple of years, more than half of US e-commerce sales are going to happen on mobile devices, right? And that's a pretty big shift that I think brands and retailers are going to need to, that have been grappling with for years, but are really going to need to refine in terms of what is the mobile user experience, and how can you ensure as a retailer that as consumers sort of shift more gradually to shopping from desktops to shopping on mobile, that you don't lose a customer in that shift because your desktop experience is optimizing one way where mobile isn't. And I think that there's optimizing your app experience to make sure that you have a really strong loyalty integration so that a mobile shopper who downloads your app is going to want to stick with your brand, or that your retailer's top of mind when you're shopping on mobile. But then there's also the very basic nuts and bolts of making sure that you have a user experience on mobile that works. Because when we talk about the fastest growing categories in e-commerce, food and beverage, health, personal care, these are things that consumers need to replenish with the click of a button, right? And mobile's great for that, but it can also be really detrimental if your experience isn't optimized.
I think on the flip side, it's important for retailers to think through how to optimize smaller screens for higher consideration purchases, right? We're not going to get away from the fact that it's simply less real estate to communicate important information. So what does your customer need to know in order to build the confidence to convert for a higher ticket item? And there's probably going to be a lot of nuance and variance across product categories, but it's an important one for retailers to have top of mind.
Blake, you mentioned loyalty programs in your answer, and that actually brings up the next question for you, Suzy, which is, do loyalty members tend to search differently?
Oh my gosh, it's another hard one, because I think this one too we can answer in so many different ways.
We've talked about this on the podcast.
Yes. So I think it depends on how you're at, like what you're thinking about when you're asking this question, right? Do loyalty members search differently? I would say yes, because if they're a loyalty member, they're going to, and your loyalty program offers a lot of rewards, you're going to skip a lot of the research part. You're going to get aware that you need something. Then you're going to go straight to where you're a member of a loyalty program that's giving you great rewards. You're going to search on that website to see if they offer what you're looking for, and then you're going to convert and move on, right? If you are talking about, do they search differently in terms of like awareness, this is a tough one, right? Because if you're loyal to a brand, like where Blake was saying brands are important, if you're loyal to a brand, whether they have a loyalty program or not, and you need pants, you will probably go to a retailer or the brand itself website to find what you're looking for. So I think it kind of just depends on how you think about loyalty and what part of the funnel we're talking about, what part of the path to purchase. The truth is, you need to have a good loyalty program, right? There are lots and lots and lots of different brands out there and lots of choice, and you need a good product and you need to offer a good loyalty program, because you're also going to get great data from the loyalty program, right? And so it's kind of a no-brainer to have a strong loyalty program and offer your consumers what they need. And we have a lot of research on this, and we talk about it a lot on the podcast as well. You really need to offer value. There are generational shifts around what folks are looking for. So read our research about loyalty programs. I mean, there should be a whole webinar on loyalty and how to use loyalty programs.
So Blake, I'm going to put you on the spot on behalf of the person who submitted the question and ask, can you cite examples of retailers who took a big hit from online competition and then saw their in-store sales rebound?
Okay. One example that comes to mind, because I remember a few months ago I saw their CEO speaking at NRF here in New York, was Barnes and Noble. I think that was, the Amazon, the first industry that they really took hold of was obviously books. Right. Barnes and Noble and other retailers, Borders in particular, they were hit really hard, right? Until the last couple of years, Barnes and Noble has really just rethought their strategy and how do we use the store to our advantage. This is a category where e-commerce penetration is very high. Amazon has its roots in the book industry, right? So they really said, okay, well, online sales are going to be online sales. Let's focus on how do we create an in-store experience that's going to offer something that an online shopper can't get. And bookstores, it's the perfect example for that, right? People may enjoy buying books online, but they also love to go and browse bookstores. It's a social place, it's a gathering place. Barnes and Noble really empowered the individual stores to design and stock the inventory the way that they see fit, which is counterintuitive to how a book chain might act. And I think, as Suzy mentioned, with authenticity, really just listening to your customers, I think that's a really true success story. Another one that just came to mind was Dick's Sporting Goods. They've been doing fairly well recently. The in-store experience is something that they've really leaned into. They operate, sportswear, apparel, and footwear. These are categories that have been really ripe for brands trying to lean more heavily away from retailers and more heavily into D2C, their own channels. Right. Dick's has really doubled down on this is the value of a strong retail, physical retail experience. And they've been keeping their foot traffic in stores really high by investing in these experiences, rock climbing and all of these, fun physical perks that you can get by coming into the store. And that's showing that they're brand partners that where we have this value. We're getting this foot traffic that, you might be Nike, you might be one of the biggest brands in the world, but you still need retailers to help facilitate, help reach your customers.
And as the dad of a daughter who shops for soccer cleats every 6 months, I can totally attest to that experience, Blake, of like going into a store, talking to a person, trying things out. The D2C thing has a lot of promise in that environment, but there's still so many things to iron out. Are there, and I think you've touched on this a little bit, are there impacts to the in-store customer journey from people using their cell phones increasingly for supplemental research or engagement or distractions or comparisons, any of the ways in which that 70% of people or 75% who are shopping in stores are using their phones? I think it's probably more than 75%, but not disputing the survey results.
No, I think customers have been doing this for a long time. We're well versed on how to use our phones to help us in a physical setting. I think what's really interesting is the evolution of how retailers are recognizing that, facilitating it, giving customers a reason to, again, stay in their ecosystem. So maybe it's connectivity through the app, something you can only access or unlock through the app. Maybe it's a digital sample station, right? We can get a free sample by signing up for a loyalty program, and you scan a QR code to do that. So that's what I'm really excited to watch, is that as retailers increasingly recognize mobile as this valuable tool, how do you facilitate that and then bring that message into the store?
Yeah, I mean, it comes down to the app optimization to some extent. Like the more you can make that app sticky and a great user experience, the more people are going to use it to support that journey.
And I think that speaks well to like the notion of some of these more sort of basic elements. It's not about building an app and then you're done. You've got an app, right? It's thinking through like, do you have the support system and the infrastructure to make sure that you're continuously evaluating those offerings and updating them to make sure that you're capturing how consumers are looking to use whatever that offering is and how they find value from it.
Well, unfortunately, that's all the time we have. This was a great conversation. We're going to have an after party, but we'll talk about that later.
And talk about loyalty programs.
Yes,
and
we haven't talked enough about that. Yeah. We've only just scratched the surface. So anyway, Suzy, Blake, Sarah, thank you so much for joining me and sharing these great insights with us. And a huge thank you to our eMarketer production crew behind the scenes for making this webinar and everything else possible. We hope you found this useful and uncovered a few nuggets that you can use to drive your business forward. And don't forget to keep a lookout for the next wave of results from our customer shopping survey later this summer. So as we wrap up, I'd like to tell you a little bit about what's happening at eMarketer. We recently rolled out eMarketer Pro Plus, giving you the advantage of faster, more informed decision-making. So please connect with us for more details. You can register for upcoming live analyst and tech talk webinars at emarketer.com/events. On the audio side, please don't forget to tune in to Behind the Numbers, eMarketer's daily podcast, which you can find anywhere you listen to podcasts. And finally, please check out our free newsletters. If you haven't already signed up, you can do so at emarketer.com/newsletters. So remember to keep an eye on your email for the link to today's playback. And of course, feel free to email us if you have any other questions. Thank you again for joining us, and enjoy the rest of your day.